Every kid who grew up near the corner drugstore knew the candy rack by heart. You could spin it with one finger and walk out with a paper sack no parent thought twice about. And here's what I often miss looking back. Half those wrappers are gone now, not because we outgrew them, but because somebody finally read the label. Number 21 on this list got pulled after testing turned up lead. Number 12 sold for decades before anyone admitted what it taught kids to do. And number 5 on this list hit a choking hazard inside a shape we handed to toddlers. These were everywhere once, then one by one they quietly vanished. So hit subscribe and pull up to the counter, because here are 25 childhood candies that got outlawed and quietly removed. Number 25. Pop Rock's Crackling Candy. Few candies ever caused a panic this loud over something this harmless. General Foods put the fizzing powder on shelves in 1976, and within 3 years the rumor had outrun the product. The story went that a child star named Little Mikey ate a pouch, washed it down with soda, and his stomach blew apart. None of it was true. The candy held nothing but carbon dioxide pressed into sugar, less gas than half a can of cola. But terrified parents flooded a Seattle hotline the FDA had to set up, and General Foods mailed 50,000 letters to school principals trying to calm everyone down. The fear did the work no recall ever could. Demand collapsed, and the company quietly pulled production in 1980. The powder sat dead on the market for 6 years before anyone dared bring it back. It was never the danger that killed Pop Rocks. It was the story people refused to stop telling. Number 24. Wax lips and wax mustaches. Half the fun was wearing the candy before you ever bit it. Kids pressed those fat red lips over their own mouths, grinned for a photo, then chewed the wax flat until the cherry flavor gave out in about 10 seconds. The mustaches turned every 6-year-old into a tiny cartoon villain. What nobody on the porch was thinking about was the paraffin itself. The wax was sold as food grade and non-toxic, but it was built to be chewed and spit out, never swallowed, and small children swallowed it anyway. Pediatric guidance kept flagging the same problem. A wad of soft wax is exactly the size and texture that can lodge in a small windpipe, and it does not dissolve the way sugar does. So the novelty drifted off the main racks, kept alive mostly as a seasonal throwback rather than the everyday treat it once was. The danger was never the flavor. It was a mouthful of wax a toddler was never meant to swallow. Number 23. Marathon Bar. Some candies vanish because they were dangerous, and some vanish because the math stopped working. Mars launched the Marathon in 1973, a long braided rope of caramel coated in chocolate that stretched 8 full inches across its wrapper. The package even printed a ruler down the side so you could prove how much you were getting. Kids loved the pull of it, the way the caramel fought back before it snapped. But that braid was expensive to make, and a long bar uses more chocolate than a stubby one for the same bite count. By 1981, Mars did the arithmetic and discontinued it across the country. Collectors still talk about it like a lost friend, partly because the British Curly Wurly looks so close that fans cross oceans to chase the memory. No Hazard pulled the Marathon. It was killed by a cost sheet, the quietest kind of removal there is. Number 22. Pixy Stix powder. Pure sour sugar in a paper straw seemed like the safest thing on the rack, right up until you watched a kid tip the whole tube straight back. That was the trouble. Pixy Stix were meant to be poured slowly onto the tongue, but children dumped the loose powder into the back of the throat in one go, and fine powder plus a sudden gasp is a recipe for choking and aspiration. Doctors warned for years that powdered candy was riskier than it looked for the youngest eaters. The brand carried an even darker shadow too. In 1974, a man in Texas poisoned a Pixy Stix with cyanide and gave it to his own son on Halloween, a crime that helped launch a generation of parents inspecting every wrapper. The straws never disappeared entirely, but the giant novelty tubes got pushed to the margins. Loose powder aimed at a child's throat was always a gamble, not a treat. Number 21. Imported tamarind and chili candy. This is the one the intro promised. The candy that got pulled after testing turned up lead. For decades, kids reached for Tart tamarind pulp and chili-dusted lollipops imported from Mexico, sweet and sour and a little spicy all at once. Then the lab results came back. Through the 1990s, the FDA and California health officials found dangerous lead levels in certain brands, and the source was the candy itself. Lead crept in through chili powder and tamarind that had been dried, ground, and stored badly, and some sweets sat in lead-glazed clay pots that leached straight into the pulp. In one round of testing, tamarind lollipop wrappers measured 21,000 parts per million of lead, ink that children licked without a second thought. Some kids who ate these regularly showed blood lead levels high enough to harm a developing brain. Federal limits cap candy at half a microgram of lead per gram, and brands like Ballerindo and Dulmex got named in warnings and yanked from shelves. The flavor was real, and so was the poison soaked into it. Number 20. Space food sticks. Nothing felt more like the future than eating what you believed the astronauts ate. Pillsbury rolled out these chewy tube-shaped snacks in the late 1960s, riding the moon landing straight into lunchboxes, all chocolate and peanut butter and caramel wrapped in foil-like rations. The marketing leaned hard on the space program connection, and a whole generation chewed them convinced they were training for orbit. But the glow faded fast. NASA tightened how companies could claim a tie to the missions, the novelty wore thin, and shifting ideas about what counted as a wholesome snack left the sticks looking dated. By the 1980s, they had drifted off American shelves almost entirely. They came back here and there as a nostalgia item, never as the everyday treat they once were. The future, it turned out, had a short shelf life. Number 19. Like-M-Aid and Fun Dip. Close your eyes and you can almost taste it again. The pouch tore open with a sound like ripping paper, and out came that loose-colored powder, cherry red or grape purple or a sour green, that made your jaw clench before you even tasted it. Then came the ritual. You licked the chalky white stick, the one they called a lick-a-stix, until it was just damp enough to hold a coat of powder, and you dipped it down into the pouch and pulled it back up loaded with sugar. The first lick hit like a spark on the tongue, sharp and grainy, and so sour your eyes watered, and the powder fizzed faintly against the roof of your mouth before it melted into pure sweet. When the stick ran out, you tipped the whole packet straight back and let the last of it pour onto your tongue. Fingers stained, lips ringed in color that lasted till supper. That last move was exactly the problem. Like-M-Aid started as a 1940s drink mix, the same powder you stirred into water, before someone realized kids would rather just eat it dry. By the time it became Fun Dip, the candy was almost pure flavored sugar and acid, and doctors kept raising the same flag. Fine, loose powder tipped into a small throat is an aspiration risk, the kind of thing that makes a child cough mid-breath and pull powder down the wrong pipe. The dye stained everything it touched, the acid was rough on young teeth, and the dunk-it-back motion that made it so much fun was the part the warnings circled. It never got banned outright, but the giant pour-it-yourself pouches got quietly scaled down and shoved to the bottom shelf. What stays with you is the powder itself, that first watering sour hit, and the purple fingers you wore like a badge. The joy was real. So was the powder a toddler was never built to inhale. Number 18. Reggie Bar. Picture a candy bar named after a man, handed out free at a baseball stadium, and you understand how strange 1978 really was. Standard Brands built the Reggie Bar around Reggie Jackson, a round disc of peanuts and caramel and chocolate, and on opening day at Yankee Stadium, the team gave one to every fan in the seats. When Jackson homered, the crowd peeled the wrappers and threw thousands of the things onto the field in celebration. The bar sold on pure star power, which is exactly why it was doomed. Once Jackson's biggest seasons passed and the hype cooled, the candy had nothing left to stand on. Sales sagged, and by the early 1980s, it was gone from shelves for good. It was never unsafe, just tied to a moment that could not last. A candy that lives on fame dies the second the fame does. Number 17. Bonkers fruit chews. Every kid remembers the commercials better than the candy, the ones where a giant piece of fruit flattened someone in the street. Nabisco sold Bonkers through the 1980s, a soft fruit chew with a tangy filling tucked in the center, and the ads ran constant on Saturday mornings. The candy itself was fine to eat. What sank it was money and shifting hands. Brands got bought and sold, the parent companies reshuffled, and a mid-tier fruit chew with no real edge got cut loose when the accountants went looking for things to drop. By the 1990s, Bonkers had quietly left American shelves, surviving mostly as a punchline and a jingle people still hum. Tiny revival runs surface now and then, never lasting. No hazard ended it. It simply lost its seat when the company cleaned out its shelf. Number 16. Jawbreakers and giant gobstoppers. There was always one kid who bought the biggest jawbreaker in the case, the one the size of a small plum that no human mouth was built to hold. That bravado was exactly what made them dangerous. A jawbreaker is hard, round, and smooth, the precise shape that can wedge into a windpipe if a child inhales sharply or stumbles mid-suck. Doctors put hard round candies near the top of the choking hazard list for young children alongside whole grapes and round lollipops because the airway closes around them and nothing gets past. The giant ones carried a second trick too. Layer after layer meant kids kept one in their cheek for an hour, sucking and talking and running, which is exactly when an accident happens. Most never vanished from shelves, but the oversized novelty versions got smaller and the warnings got louder. A candy you cannot safely fit in a child's mouth was never really built for one. Number 15. Candy necklaces. Wearing your snack around your neck felt like genius when you were 7, a string of pastel sugar beads you could nibble all afternoon. The hazard was hiding in plain sight on the elastic cord. Those little chalky beads are hard, round, and bead-sized, the textbook profile for a choking hazard in small children, and stringing them on a cord meant a child could yank a whole cluster loose and stuff several in at once. Worse, the elastic itself drew warnings. A necklace looped over a toddler's head is a strangulation risk if it snags, which is why safety guidance kept steering parents away from giving them to the youngest kids. They never got formally banned, but the warnings followed them onto every package, and the product drifted toward older children only. A snack you wear is charming until you remember a toddler's throat is exactly bead-sized. Number 14. Toxic waste and extreme sour candy. The whole pitch was a dare, a candy that practically promised to hurt, and kids lined up for it. Brands built around brutal sourness coated their sweets in heavy doses of citric and malic acid, the stuff that makes you wince and your tongue tingle. The fun had a real cost. Dentists started flagging that this level of acid strips tooth enamel fast, and held in the mouth long enough it can leave raw sores and chemical burns on a child's tongue and cheeks. Reports of mouth injuries piled up, and one popular sour brand even faced a recall when lead turned up in testing, the same poison that haunts these lists. The sourest novelty tubs got reined in, pushed behind warnings about how long a child should keep them in the mouth. A candy whose entire selling point is that it burns was never as harmless as the giggles made it sound. Number 13. Candy buttons on paper. Everybody remembers the strip, those little dots of pastel sugar dried onto a long ribbon of white paper you peeled one row at a time. And everybody remembers the catch. You could never get the candy off clean, so you ate half a mouthful of paper with every bite and just learned to live with it. That paper was the small problem. The bigger one was the buttons themselves, tiny hard sugar dots the exact size that lodges in a young child's airway, which kept them on the choking hazard list for the smallest eaters. The candy was cheap to make and nostalgic to sell, so it never fully disappeared. But it slid off the main racks into specialty and throwback bins as parents grew wary of bite-sized dots for toddlers. The charm was real, and so was the mouthful of paper. Underneath both sat a sugar dot sized exactly wrong for a small throat. Number 12. Candy cigarettes. The intro promised this one, the candy that sold for decades before anyone admitted what it taught kids to do. Those little white sticks with the red painted tip sat on every counter, and some boxes even copied real cigarette branding so closely that tobacco companies mailed their own labels over to the candy makers. Children held them between two fingers, pretended to puff, and blew out the powdered sugar like smoke. That was the entire point, and that was the problem. After the 1964 Surgeon General report tied smoking to lung cancer, public health groups argued these candies were grooming a generation to light up for real. A later study of more than 25,000 adults found most smokers had eaten candy cigarettes as kids. Country after country agreed and banned them outright, including Canada, Finland, Ireland, Brazil, and the United Kingdom. American makers dodged the heat by quietly renaming them Candy Stix. A treat built to rehearse a deadly habit was never as innocent as the wrapper made it look. Number 11. Tart and Tinies. Some candies vanish so quietly that fans spend years arguing online about whether they ever really existed. Wonka rolled these out in the 1970s. Tiny cylinders of compressed dextrose with a chalky crumble and a sharp tart bite, and through the 1980s they sold alongside Nerds and Wacky Wafers as some of the company's biggest sellers. Kids poured them straight from the box by the handful, tipping a dozen at a time onto the tongue, which is exactly where the worry started. Each piece was small, hard, and round enough to slip down a young throat before a child even finished chewing, the same profile doctors flag on every choking hazard list for little ones. A box rattling loose in a coat pocket meant pieces scattered everywhere, found by the smallest hands in the house. By the 1990s, the original hard version was discontinued, and the candy-coated remake that replaced it disappeared not long after. A small brand revived the name years later, but the everyday boxes were long gone. No scandal ended them. They were a pellet-sized treat that fell off the shelf and out of memory at the same time. Number 10. Razzles. First it was a candy, then it was a gum, and that jingle stuck in more heads than the flavor ever did. The brand arrived in 1966 as a little round disc you chewed until the hard sugar shell broke down and the whole thing turned into a wad of bubble gum mid-bite. Kids loved the magic trick of it, the candy that changed shape in your mouth. But that shape carried a quiet risk for the youngest eaters. A small hard disc is the textbook size that can lodge in a child's airway before it ever softens into gum, which is why guidance kept steering the very young away from coin-shaped candies. Razzles never got banned, and Tootsie still makes them today, but the giant everyday displays faded as parents grew wary and tastes drifted towards softer chews. The flavor faded in seconds, the way it always had. The hazard underneath it was a sugar disc sized exactly wrong for a toddler. Number 9. Chiclets. Those tiny candy-coated gum squares once came in every flavor, sold from gumball machines and corner racks 2 pieces at a time. The shell cracked with a satisfying snap before the gum inside went soft, and a box rattled in your pocket like a maraca. 2 problems closed in over the years. The first was the gum itself. Chicle came from sapodilla trees, and as those groves thinned out, makers leaned on synthetic bases, and the classic recipe lost its footing. The second was the shape. A small, hard-coated pellet is exactly the kind of object doctors warn can slip into a young windpipe hole. The original American Chiclets were discontinued around 2016, surviving only as imports made elsewhere. The rattle in the pocket is gone now. What ended it was a fading tree and a pellet built smaller than a child's throat could safely handle. Number 8. Now and Later. The name was a promise printed right on the wrapper. Hard and fruity now, soft and chewy later, if you had the patience to wait. Born in Brooklyn in 1962, each square started out stiff as a brick and slowly gave way as it warmed in your mouth, which was half the fun and most of the danger. Dentists watched the damage add up. That rock-hard first bite was famous for cracking teeth and yanking loose fillings, and more than one kid who got impatient and bit down too soon paid for it in the dentist's chair a week later. Worse for the smallest eaters, a firm square swallowed before it had time to soften sat in the airway like a cork, landing it on choking warnings for young children right beside the hard round candies. The candy never disappeared and still sells today, but those warnings followed it onto the package, and the rock-hard original slowly lost ground to softer, safer chews aimed at the same nickel buyers. The promise was real. So was the cracked molar waiting inside that first stubborn bite. Number 7. Nick L. Nip Wax Bottles. A nickel bought you a tiny row of fat wax bottles, each one filled with a thimble of syrup so sweet it barely counted as a drink. The ritual was the whole appeal. You bit the top clean off, tipped the bottle back for one sugary sip, then chewed the empty wax shell like gum until your jaw gave up. That last habit was the trouble. The wax was sold as food grade and non-toxic, but it was never meant to be swallowed, and the bottle itself carried a choking warning for children under 3. A small child who gulped the soft wax instead of spitting it out, or swallowed a whole bitten-off cap, faced exactly the kind of blockage that does not dissolve. The bottles never fully vanished, kept alive as a nostalgia novelty rather than the everyday nickel treat they once were. The sip was sweet and gone in a second. The wax it left behind was the part a toddler was never built to swallow. Number 6. Lucas Lyman Salt Shaker Candy. Sour, salty, and a little spicy, this powdered Mexican candy came in a little shaker you tipped straight onto your tongue, and kids could not get enough of the pucker. The danger was invisible and inside the powder. Through the early 2000s, health officials tested the Lucas brand line and found lead levels as high as twice the federal limit for candy. Because the product was packaged like a seasoning rather than a sweet, it slipped through the cracks and stayed on shelves longer than it should have, even as some states began pulling it. Lead is no small thing in a child, capable of harming a developing brain at levels you can never taste or see. By 2004, the maker had withdrawn the salted version and pulled millions of units from stores. The flavor was a craze. The poison stirred into it was the reason it had to go. Number 5. Rollerball Liquid Candy. This is the one the intro warned about, the choking hazard hidden inside a shape we handed to toddlers. The design seemed clever enough. A little plastic bottle of sour liquid candy topped with a rolling ball you licked, the same roll-on shape you would see on a roll-on bottle. That ball was the flaw. Under a curious child's tongue, the rolling ball could pop loose from its housing and drop straight into the mouth, round and slick and perfectly sized to seal off a small windpipe. Safety regulators traced real tragedies to it, including a young child who choked and needed emergency surgery to pull the ball back out, and at least one death tied to the same failure. The warning that followed was blunt, telling families to stop using every rollerball candy of this type at once and throw them out. A toy-shaped bottle that fed a loose ball toward a child's throat was a hazard wearing the costume of a treat. Number 4. Candy Lipstick Tubes. Little girls felt impossibly grown up twisting up a stick of pink sugar shaped exactly like their mother's lipstick. The packaging was the appeal and the problem in equal measure. The candy came in a small plastic tube with a removable cap and a twist-up base, all of it sized for tiny hands and tiny mouths, and every loose piece on it was a choking hazard waiting to happen. A young child could pop the cap free and put it straight in the mouth, or snap off the base, or bite off a chunk of the hard waxy candy stick that was firm enough to lodge in a throat. Pediatric guidance has long warned that small, detachable parts on novelty candy are among the riskiest things you can hand a toddler. The lipsticks never got formally banned, but the warnings pushed them toward older kids and off the everyday racks. Playing dress-up with candy was harmless fun until you counted how many small, loose pieces a little one could swallow. Number 3. Peanut Butter Oompas. Long before peanut butter and chocolate became a candy aisle staple, Wonka tried to own it with a button-shaped sweet named after the little workers from the chocolate factory. Launched in 1971 to ride the wave of the Chocolate Factory movie, Oompas were bigger than the candies they resembled, with a crisp painted shell wrapped around 2 separate layers of chocolate and peanut butter inside. Kids who found them loved them, and that is exactly what makes the disappearance sting all these years later. The candy was never recalled and never unsafe in any way. It simply got crowded out of the aisle. Bigger, better-backed brands already owned the peanut butter and chocolate corner, The movie buzz that launched the Oompas faded within a few seasons, and a mid-tier novelty with no real edge was an easy line to cut when the company trimmed its catalog. By the mid-1970s, they were gone, quietly reworked into other Wonka products and then dropped for good. Collectors still ask for them by name decades on. No Hazard ended the Oompas. They were squeezed off the shelf by Candies that simply sold better. Number 2. Big League Chew. A pouch of shredded pink bubble gum let every kid on the sandlot feel like a big leaguer in the dugout, and that was exactly the design. A minor league pitcher dreamed it up in 1980 as a harmless answer to the chewing tobacco ball players stuffed in their cheeks, packing the shredded gum into a soft foil pouch built to look just like a tin of dip. Kids pinched out a wad, tucked it in one cheek, and spit on the sidelines like the big leaguers they idolized, and critics saw real trouble buried in the imitation. Research had already linked candy versions of tobacco to a greater chance that children would pick up the real adult habit later on, and a gum pouch dressed as chewing tobacco landed in the same crosshairs as the candy cigarettes higher on this list. Public health pressure mounted to keep these tobacco-mimicking candies away from young children, the same wave that had already driven their smoking cousins clean off the shelves overseas. The gum inside was just sugar and flavor. The lesson it quietly rehearsed, copying a tobacco habit before a child knew any better, was the part people fought hardest to pull back. Number 1. Konjac Mini Fruit Jelly Cups. The most surprising removal on this list looked the most innocent. A little plastic cup of fruit gel you squeezed straight into your mouth in one slippery push. Imported mostly from Asia and sold under cheerful names like Mini Fruit Bites, these cups hid a deadly flaw in their key ingredient. Konjac, a plant gum also called glucomannan, does not melt at body heat the way ordinary gelatin does, so a child who slid the whole cup in could not break it up or cough it free. American federal investigators tied at least 6 children's deaths to choking on these cups, and similar tragedies were reported abroad. The response was as quiet as it was final. The FDA issued public warnings, forced recalls, and then blocked the small Konjac jelly cups from entering the country at all through a standing import alert. A candy that looked like nothing more than fruit and sugar was outlawed at the border for the lives it had already taken. Tell me which of these you still remember reaching for, because every one of them was somebody's whole afternoon once. What stays with me is not the danger hidden in the labels, but the trust in the moment, a paper sack and a coin that bought a small joy nobody questioned. These candies were never really about the sugar. They were about being a kid in a world that felt simpler than it was before anyone read the fine print. Drop the one you miss most in the comments, the flavor that takes you straight back to that spinning rack.